On average, U.S. broadband households with smart home devices own more than 7 devices and spend thousands of dollars a year on home services. Parks Associates Consumer Insights dashboards share adoption, consumer demand, and market changes across the year for 5 leading markets serving the connected home to identify critical shifts in these markets and in consumer sentiment by tracking the core metrics that matter. This consumer research draws from surveys of more than 10,000 U.S. households, including trending data, sometimes reaching back more than a decade. Parks Associates offers consumer insights dashboards for 5 markets: home services, consumer electronics, video services, residential security, and smart home. To share a little more, we recently released the Smart Home Dashboard, revealing that 1/4 of U.S. broadband households bought at least one smart home device in the past 12 months. And households with at least one smart home device now own, on average, more than 7 devices. This dashboard covers the extensive product categories active in the smart home, including smart thermostats, smart appliances, network cameras, video doorbells, smart smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, smart door locks, smart garage door openers, and smart lighting products, among others. We also recently announced the release of the Home Services Dashboard, tracking broadband, mobile, and other consumer services. This dashboard shows that as of Q1 2021, the percentage of U.S. broadband households with standalone broadband service increased from 33% in Q1 2018 to 41% in Q1 2021, following the declining popularity of pay TV bundles. These consumers pay $64 per month on average for standalone broadband service, up from just $39 per broadband household in 2011, a 64% growth rate. The fastest growing segment of home service bundles is a double play combining home internet and mobile service. Consumers are placing a greater emphasis on high quality broadband and mobile services, which is building value in bundling these services. Both the residential broadband and mobile industries experienced substantial growth during 2020 and into the first half of 2021, with demand particularly strong for high-speed internet and fiber connections. And 19% of U.S. broadband households currently bundle mobile and home internet services, paying an average of $128 per month. Going forward, 24% of U.S. broadband households reported plans to upgrade their home broadband, which would drive broadband service ARPU upwards 5% year over year. Adoption of residential security services has also continued to increase following the COVID-19 pandemic, creating additional bundling opportunities among connectivity and peace of mind services heading into the second half of 2021. Our dashboards provide companies with ongoing and actionable data on the adoption, purchase intentions, and trends for key markets serving the connected consumer at home. We are excited to bring this valuable trending data and insights to the market. To subscribe or request more information, please contact our sales team at sales@parksassociates.com.
If you miss a live session, you can go back at any time to watch on demand. Go to Watch Replays and click on the session that you want to view. Have you created your own event agenda in SwapCard? Visit the Agenda and Watch Replay tabs to add sessions that interest you to your own event. You can go back to My Event to revisit any bookmarked sessions, sponsors, and items. We want to make sure that you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors. You can interact with them by visiting the Booths and the Sponsor tab. You can also bookmark sponsors or add items to your event to view later. Sponsors have uploaded extra materials for attendees. Make sure to visit sponsors that interest you to chat with one of their team members or save documents for later. We have dedicated meeting slots set up for break times between sessions. Continue the discussion by requesting meetings from others in the SwapCard platform. Schedule a meeting with another attendee or a sponsor by visiting their page. The panelists and speakers will be addressing your questions live during the stream. During the stream, use the question tab to ask your questions early in the presentation. Go to the poll tab to answer polls that will be discussed during the live stream. If you need help navigating SwapCard, please reach out to our team by mentioning @Parks Associates in the chat box or by contacting one of our team members via our company page.
Thank you for joining us at Smart Energy Summit. Currently, 44% of U.S. internet households report they actively work to reduce energy consumption at home. This executive event brings insight from our research team, leaders from utilities, telecom, and security companies, as well as manufacturing, software, retailers, and more, to talk about the future of energy for consumers at home. We survey 10,000 broadband households each quarter to provide the most reliable and accurate view of the market. Smart Energy Summit brings together industry leaders to learn more about how consumers can play an active role in energy savings, as well as the future of distributed energy resources, distribution and channels for energy management solutions, consumer adoption and trends of smart energy devices, increased interest in electric vehicles, grid modernization, and more. Join us to address these key questions regarding the smart energy industry. Thank you for joining us today at Smart Energy Summit.
Hi, this is Chris White, welcoming you to the latest of our virtual series, Smart Energy Summit, Electric Vehicles, a New Era for Consumers. I'm happy that you guys are all here. We have a great agenda today focused on electric vehicles. We're going to start with a short presentation by myself using some data that I recently included in a report. I'm going to tell you all about that in a second. Then we're going to be followed by a conversation with a mix of energy and electric vehicle service equipment, supply equipment manufacturers. Then we're going to have a fireside chat with another EVSE leader led by my boss, Elizabeth Parks. And then finally, we're going to have another panel that's talking more about infrastructure and charging stations. We've got a great mix of energy providers and manufacturers, again, who are going to kind of share their perspective. And all of us, we're going to be talking about the growth of electric vehicles that's coming and give you guys an idea of what it's going to look like and who's going to be creating solutions that the consumers need. So first, I want to start by thanking our sponsors, Schneider Electric, SmartThings, Rapid Response Monitoring, Zen Ecosystems, and Particle. I also want to thank our supporters who help us get the word out about our conferences, but also help us share information on all the industries that we follow. These partners are extremely helpful to us in terms of getting the word out, and also we love working with them to kind of further all of their projects. So thanks to all of our supporters. I mentioned that this is the latest of our virtual series. And what I meant by that was we have another one coming also in November. That's going to be focused on our distributed energy resource and renewables discussion. It's going to be basically following another report that we have coming about solar and storage. So it's going to be really exciting that we're going to have some fresh perspectives And then we're going to bring in some panels to come in and talk to us about that topic. That's super important. We'll probably talk about distributed energy a little bit today too, to be honest. All right, so I want to start with my analyst insight. As I mentioned, I'm Chris White. I'm a senior analyst at Parks Associates. I cover smart home a little bit, and I also lead our smart energy vertical. I'm also the co-host of the Connected Consumer podcast, which you can find at parksassociates.com/podcast. We actually have a podcast coming out next week where Rosie, who's my co-host, and I are talking to Saeed Ahmed from Infineon. That's on the topic of electric vehicles. They produce a lot of components that are used in electric vehicles. So that's another perspective that you can bring. If you're interested in that topic, go to the podcast link and subscribe so that comes into your feed next week. Also, as I mentioned, I'm going to be presenting some data here in a report that I'm drawing from a report that I recently put together called Electric Vehicles in the Smart Home. That's available now. So please, you'll see our VP of Sales is going to be leading the last panel. So you'll see his face and you'll know who to reach out to get some more EV data. So I want to start the day, kind of set the table a little bit by talking about where we're coming from and where we are today. So for a long time, the history of the United States, the internal combustion engine and the gas-powered car caused major cultural changes and has been super important. It defines who we are in a lot of ways in terms of how we've built out our country. And there was a major kind of disruption in that about 25 years ago when the Toyota Prius hybrid hit the scene. And suddenly people were starting to think about a little bit about other ways to power their cars. And then we had another disruption recently, let's say in the 20-teens, when our guy Elon Musk here really pushed the Tesla brand to the forefront and changed the way that we all thought about electric vehicles. So we see the impact of these kind of iconic moves where we see that there's a good number of people who are using hybrids, but still most people are still using internal combustion engines. It's about 75% that are still doing that. So EV ownership, which is currently at 6%, has a lot of runway to grow. We also know that our current EV owners, based on our research, are young, affluent, urban, dual income families, and they are actually usually living in kind of a multifamily environment, and they use their cars to drive to work or school. So this is their daily driver. A lot of this could change as the EV market grows and more different types of consumers start driving EVs. Now, as things have changed, the way that we talk about electric vehicles from a research standpoint also changed. So for a long time, we've been tracking the purchase intention of electric vehicles, and we recently saw a jump from 10% to this 16% that we're showing here today. Now, I want to note that we've always talked about that in terms of non-owners buying EVs, and what we've come to realize in the research that we've been focusing on as we got a little deeper on the subject is that a lot of current EV owners are also excited to add another EV or to replace their current EV with one of the kind of hot new vehicles that are coming out today. So looking at a different way, showing all households, we actually see that more than a quarter of people are interested in some level, and kind of a more apples to apples comparison is that 16 goes to 19% when you look at people who say they're very likely to buy an EV. So any way you look at it, a fifth or a quarter of people are super interested in electric vehicles. Now, understanding who these electric vehicle owners are is something that we've been, also looking deeply at for the last 5 or 10 years. Let's say the EV buyer has been thought of as being more green, concerned about saving the planet, and things like that. And our research actually does support that. So the EV buyers today are 3 times more likely to say they prefer to live in a community that's powered by solar compared to non-EV buyers. They're 2.5 times or 5 times more, depending on how you ask the question, willing to pay more for renewable energy coming from their service provider. And they have a much higher likelihood to own or intend to own solar panels for their home. And they are much more likely to renovate their homes to save energy or participate in energy saving programs. So they are definitely green. They are concerned about energy consumption in their lives broadly, not just in terms of their car. But another piece that we found that's a really interesting indicator that matters a lot to the other verticals that we study here at Parks Associates is that they're really high in tech affinity. They're much more likely, no matter what type of EV owner or intended owner you look at, just much more likely to own a security system or a smart home device than non-owners and non-intenders. So what we see is not just the green people, but maybe even more important than that, we see EV buyers and intenders are very interested in having high-tech products. Now, even during this time of all this growth, we see that familiarity in terms of all households has not really increased very much. So as EVs are growing and this purchase intentions are growing, currently that's still within this quarter of people that are highly familiar. So there is opportunity for a lot more education, and I'm expecting that this number is going to go up significantly as more and more OEMs roll out their electrified lineups and support that with promotions and marketing, of course. So the more that Stellantis is putting out their electric vehicles, the more Stellantis commercials we'll see for their stuff, and then people will start to be more familiar with electric vehicles. So that's going to be interesting to track going forward. Now, beyond simple familiarity with EVs, consumers need to understand the actual benefits of EVs and some components of the EVs. And we see that familiarity is low across all EV benefits, and actually only 18% of the consumers that we tested indicated that they were familiar with all 6 items that we're showing here, which just kind of shows some basic things about how EVs work, charging, and tax incentives. But I think actually that tax incentive one is really interesting and something that we're going to touch on a couple times probably today, because the incentives that are involved with buying an electric vehicle can be several $1,000s up to $7,500. And there's actually a kind of a political situation that's in flux where Schumer and Manchin struck a deal in the Senate that allowed them to pass a bill that would extend and reshape the criteria around these incentives. But of course, my high school civics reminds me that this bill also needs to make its way through the House. So anything can happen. I saw some news this morning that Manchin is being criticized. Sinema is causing trouble. So who knows if this is going to pass, but at least the fact that it got close is a good sign that there is interest in the government to maintain and even extend the incentives that we're talking about here soon. So now also, in addition to this familiarity of the benefits thing, we also tested the impact of these benefits on the people who don't own. So this is the quality of the persuading that this stuff can be done. And we saw that the highest tested was that would change the mind of a non-EV owner was the ability for an EV to run 400 miles or longer with a single charge. Now those people maybe are going to be waiting for a little while because EVs that run 350 are pretty rare. It's mostly in the 200s or low 300s right now. So they might be waiting a while. But all the other groups that are saying that they're interested in widespread charging stations, tax breaks, electricity plans that are cheaper that make EV ownership cheaper than gas, all these things are available now or coming soon. So as the education rolls out and the promotions roll out, from a marketing standpoint, these people are going to start to realize that EVs actually do meet some of the criteria that they're looking for. Similarly, we look at purchase inhibitors, and we see that people are concerned about the cost of EVs and also charging. So this is just a different way to look at that feature thing we just looked at a second ago. And the point here, again, is similar. These things are about to change, get better and easier. And as these inhibitors start to decrease, we're going to start seeing more intenders. That's our prediction. But something I should note is that all this data that I've been showing you today and everything in my report that I shared is based on a survey from Q4 2021. So this is recent data from a market research perspective, but in emerging technology, this happens to us sometimes where things change during time. And so what we've seen since we asked this survey, Vladimir Putin decided to invade the Ukraine. The microchip shortage continued, and everyone's trying to work out these issues, figure out how to keep energy prices down as gas prices hit $5 a gallon in some states. And these are all issues that can impact electric vehicle growth in terms of manufacturing electric vehicles and making them available in terms of the microchip shortage, but then also creating all this pain at the pump that's going to make people consider electric vehicles as an alternative to gas-powered vehicles. Another thing that we've seen in the past couple months is a rollout of EVs of all types. So our research showed that most current shoppers are leaning towards luxury or sports cars, which I think is kind of influenced by what Tesla has been doing in terms of their lineup. But all these other vehicles are coming out. There's vehicles in the crossover category, SUVs, pickup trucks. All these things are going to be available soon or kind of on the streets now in small numbers. So we're going to see continued growth, I think, and a change in what the profile of the EV ownership world looks like. The other piece that's going to happen is that all of our consumers are going to start to see fleets of EVs all around. We're going to talk about this a little bit in the panel here coming up, but we have BrightDrop has a relationship with Walmart, but also Canoo, which I chose a picture of their van because it looks the most interesting, I think. But then also Rivian has a relationship with Amazon, where they're bringing out their vans, and these are starting to roll out now in some states. And we also have the rideshare operator Revel, who we've had on one of our panels before, who operates a fleet of all Teslas. So this is a picture of a charging facility in Brooklyn. So our consumers are going to be seeing vehicles of all shapes, sizes, and colors from EVs driving from share and also from delivery people. And then even spacemen now are going to be riding around in EVs because Canoo won the contract with NASA to have their crew cars. So we're going to have our astronauts wearing a bunch of their gear driving around in special Canoo vans. So anywhere you look, you're going to start to see an EV. So I want to talk to my panel, bring them in now so we can talk about how this growth is going to look and what challenges it's going to face, in addition to the ones that I already discussed, or maybe go a little deeper into the ones I discussed. So I'm excited to bring everyone in here today. It's a great panel. A bunch of veterans actually from Smart Energy Summit in the past. So I really appreciate people continuing their engagement, deepening their relationship with us. Luis, I know you from one of our in-person ones. You've been on a panel before. He's the business development manager at NLX Way. I'm excited to bring him in. Hello, Luis. How are you doing today?
Hey, Chris. Can you hear me well, first of all?
Yes, you sound great.
Excellent.
Tell us about NLX Way.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thanks for having me. Good to be on the panel with you again and with the whole team. Chris already made the introduction, business development manager for EV charging at NLX Way. I think everybody knows we manufacture electric vehicle chargers, but we're as well into the energy services side of things with a lot of demand response, and managed charging is very important for us. It's no secret that we've been rated lately by different third-party sites like CNET and Car and Driver, like you see, as the #1 charger out there for your residential needs. But what most people don't know is that we have a large commercial offering as well that we're rolling out. And again, having managed charging as the center of our offering is the primary focus that we'd like to put out there.
Thanks for being with us. All right, next we have Maria, the Director of Innovation from Bidgely. Maria, thank you for joining us. Hello, tell us a little bit about what Bidgely is doing in the EV space.
Thanks, Chris. Really happy to be here. So Bidgely is an energy intelligence provider. We have been around since 2011, and we have a specific functionality where we actually work with utilities to ingest smart meter data and then give them deep insights through the technology of disaggregation. Now, an important result of behind the meter information is actually the solutions we can provide to utilities. And so our solutions platform is comprised of really 3 outcomes or 3 goals. The first is to turn customers into happy and engaged energy partners in the future, where energy flow is quickly becoming a two-way street. It's going to be important to have customers on board. The second one is actually to build and manage a modern grid and have responsiveness and resiliency through DERs. And so that's really where we are going to hit on electric vehicles today. We're able to detect electric vehicles and then help customers manage them and help utilities get the most out of that management. And finally, we also help on the back end side of a utility. Through our platform, we help utilities run smart and cost-effective operations through our data insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. All right, next we have Jan. He's previously been involved with some SES panels and presentations in the past as a representative from Schneider Electric, but now he's one of the founders and he's the Director of Business Development at EIQ Mobility. So welcome back to the SES world, I guess, Jan, and thank you for being here today. Just tell us a little bit about your company now.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Correct. After Schneider Electric in 2018, I co-founded a company called EIQ Mobility. And what we've built ourselves up to be is the leading provider of fleet electrification assessments in North America for a very broad spectrum of vehicle use cases, light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles, for clients like utilities or auto manufacturers and public and corporate fleets. So you can see some of our bragging rights here. We've done this for over 200,000 vehicles, literally hundreds of millions of miles of data, and you can see some of the logos of the companies we've worked with. And a lot of this is really built around decomplexifying the decision process, right? If you think about how many vehicle OEMs are in the market, Chris, you mentioned a few. Same thing with chargers, same thing with cost of electricity, depending on the different utilities, federal incentives, state incentives, etc. It becomes an incredibly complex decision process. And so we've built a very powerful software platform and a customer success team that delivers really high quality, actionable decision outcomes to fleets, right? On what are the right vehicles, the right EVs, what are the right chargers, how much electricity do you need at a site, what are the financial outcomes, what is the carbon outcome of this conversion. So it's a really important first step in an electrification journey for fleets. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jan. All right, last but not least, we have the Senior Director of Industry Solutions from AutoGrid, Sadia. I don't know if you've been on any of the panels, but I've seen you at our conferences before. Specifically, there was one time I made a joke at our one of our in-person ones, and you laughed, and I'm not sure many other people laughed. So I just want to say I appreciate you for having a good sense of humor and also for being here today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with my fellow panelists and attendees to discuss this topic today. A little bit about AutoGrid and the EV and EVSE programs we have delivered to our customers since 2012. AutoGrid is the #1 energy flexibility management solution provider in the industry. We have the leading platform to manage multi-asset virtual power plants that deliver value to grid operators and end users of DERs, including EV owners. In 2021, we delivered 37 gigawatt hours of energy across our production deployments when the grid was most stressed. This year, we delivered 300 megawatts of flexible capacity in a single production instance in a single day for one of our customers. In the space of EV, EVSE management, we have delivered multi-vendor EVSE management solutions for our utility customers, which included participation from 35 vendors in a single program. Currently, we have about 5,500 chargers in California enrolled into our programs in just that state itself. And in the summer of 2023, we also plan to deliver vehicle-to-grid or V2G solutions from school buses and passenger vehicles for utility customers in California. Our EV EVSE partner network is growing, which means that whether you're serving a residential, multi-dwelling unit, workplace, public, or fleet charging customer, we have a comprehensive solution and a future-proof solution for utilities and EV owners alike. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
All right, great. So I think this is a great panel. I'm excited to bring you guys all in and kind of set the stage a little bit by asking everyone to describe the landscape as you see it, kind of from your perspective, based on the things that your companies are most focused on. I tried to paint this broad picture, but I think it'll be better if you guys kind of give us a little deeper point of view. So Jan, EIQ Mobility is often very focused on fleets. So could you start by telling us a little bit about what's been going on in 2022 in terms of electric vehicle fleets actually getting up and running?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So let's set the stage, right, on what fleets mean, right? Think about really large corporate fleets or public fleets for cities and counties or federal fleets, right? And in aggregate, these fleets represent probably somewhere around 15% of all vehicles on the road. It's hard to get exact numbers, but they represent half of all energy, so all fuel consumed and all emissions, right? So fewer numbers of vehicles, but of course bigger vehicles and really big impact on fuel consumption and emissions. So it's a really important sector. So what's happened in the last 12 months? Well, first of all, you've seen really big investments from the OEM, from the manufacturers in terms of building up fleet EVs. So you see work from Daimler Truck, right, the biggest truck manufacturer in North America, on their e-Cascadias. You see work from GM and Ford on building out EVs for police fleets, for package delivery. You see BrightDrop that have contracts like Canoe with Walmart and FedEx and others. So the OEMs are spending a ton of money dedicating vehicles to fleets. And then the other side is that every single Fortune 500 company in the US and a lot of public fleets really are building up their ESG mandates, right? And you cannot be a major entity, public or corporate, without having a sustainability goal. And in many cases, transportation is a big piece of this. So their Scope 1 emissions is a big deal. So they're really starting to include transportation electrification into their goal setting, in many cases for 2023, which is around the corner. So all this to say that between what's happening at the OEM side and on the fleet side, and then of course at the policy side, you see what's happening. You mentioned what's happening in Washington. Who knows what's going to happen? But there's a lot of attention to this topic that's coming from Washington also. And it's creating this sort of perfect storm where now fleets are passing significant orders of vehicles. They're not getting them as quickly as they want, but this is happening at a much faster pace than it was even 12 months ago.
Right. So I think, Sadia, it makes sense for you to go next here and kind of chime in, because I know that AutoGrid is involved, as you mentioned, with the fleets of school buses and doing more virtual power plant behaviors with that. So could you talk a little bit about what AutoGrid's doing and has seen in the past year in terms of rolling out electrified fleets?
Yeah, so I think from the point of view of, your own research has shown that 55% of people who are not interested in purchasing an electric vehicle, a big reason for that is cost, right? So anything that you can do to chip away at the cost of ownership helps the consumer and helps the EV owner ultimately, whether it's a fleet owner and operator, or even at the other end of the spectrum, a passenger vehicle owner, right? So by participating in multi-asset virtual power plants, and the reason why the multi-asset aspect is important is that it's not just EVs, but it's any DER out there that can participate in these kinds of programs. But EVs is a big and growing component of it. And the amount of flexibility that you can get from EVs is also growing, especially when you start to talk about V2G. And when you enable end customers or end users or EV owners to be able to participate in these types of programs, to be able to capture the incremental value associated with their asset. It's not the main value that they're getting out of it. The main usage of it is transportation. So that has to be secured. But over and above that, anything that you can add on top of it reduces the overall cost of ownership. And it does it in a way such that it benefits the grid as well, which is, from a grid operator's perspective, when they're thinking about this, increasing amount of EV loads, it causes them a lot of worry because they don't know when these loads are going to come. Is it going to be in the middle of the day? Is it going to be in the evenings? How do they manage it in terms of peak load, peak generation on the system? So these kinds of solutions, which is what AutoGrid provides, creates value across the EV VSC value chain for multiple stakeholders, and in a way that benefits them all.
All right. So Maria, Sadia just brought up this idea of managing load and energy providers understanding new patterns that are going to be evolving as more and more EVs are on the grid. So do you want to talk a little bit about what Bijali's seen in the last year in terms of how loads are changing, what type of work that you guys are needing to do to support your energy clients in terms of getting ready for EVs?
Yeah, definitely. Just to start first, I think something we've seen in the last year, really the last few years, is this overwhelming intention of more consumers to purchase, and also the wider availability of vehicles, which you mentioned. And what that does is it's no longer just that Tesla load coming on where potentially utilities could see the Tesla, production rate and assume how their grid was going to change. Now, many different types of customers are starting to participate, residential as well as fleets, but also different types of customers, those that are tech savvy, those that aren't, often more higher income, but also lower income. And so it's now not really easy to predict where an EV is going to come online or when. And so Bidgely, actually using our disaggregation capability, have been helping utilities track the growth of EVs in their territory. And not just the growth through detection, but actually the patterns of the charging. Because I think that's something that many folks don't think about right now, is that EV load isn't going to necessarily always hit at the right times. And so when a consumer purchases, and many consumer purchases that vehicle, and they haven't potentially been instructed to charge in a certain time period, we can be creating these localized peaks. And so something we've really been seeing is the intention coming from the utilities to engage customers with what you might call a managed charging program to facilitate when the charging is occurring. Also, I see utilities really trying to strengthen their rates through innovative rate designs for either targeted specifically for EVs or targeted for peaks, so that they can also help consumers save that money, but they can also have a more predictable load. So over the next few years, I really expect utilities to be investing in that insight and analytics to where DERs, not just EVs, are. And then how they'll affect their load shapes and how they can continue to serve in a resilient and reliable manner.
That's right, Maria. Now, Luis, you guys are on the front line. You're making the EVSE that is causing all this trouble / helping society. So talk to us a little bit about how things have been going the past year in terms of putting juice boxes on walls, and also any C&I fleet type stuff that you want to mention.
Sure. Yes, like you mentioned, we've been causing a little bit of problem there with the juice box on the residential side of things. To the point that at this time, every time we're talking to a new utility partner and trying to put together some programs, we can often just go and tell them, we know of a bunch of juice boxes in your service territory that you have no idea. I think a little bit to what's been mentioned before on how important these programs visibility are for utilities, that will only end up bringing a benefit for everybody else. I think there's been a lot of challenges. You guys have mentioned it, the acquisition of an EV from a price point, availability of vehicles in general, even availability of chargers is becoming an issue with shortages of materials and so on. But even through all these challenges, what we've seen more important is that utilities are trying to work, and regulators as well, not just utilities, of course, trying to work towards a understanding of what charging looks like from all sorts of different types of customers. The single family home customer, I think it's the most obvious, easiest one to understand. But when you start to bring into the mix multi-unit dwellings, workplace, obviously fleets, to Jan's point, and being someone, the 50% of vehicles out there, all of these different types of customers have different profiles in behavior, right? And know when they're going to start charging. You don't know if it's critical charging, and they just decided to, you're not supposed to be charging during this time, but either way you have to. Data is the valuable point to do and to have today, and to understand your different types of customers, and then from there be able to design proper rates, proper programs that satisfy everybody's needs, but are also taking care of the cables and infrastructure that is out there, right? And have that managed charging focus. But none of that works without having the data. None of that works without all of us working together to share our insights and to grow the industry as one. It's going to take all of us, right, to get things done in the right way and not have emergencies later on.
Yeah, so Luis is touching on some best practices here. I mean, it really is going to take a village, right? All of the organizations that we have on this panel, and also the next one today, and all of our energy providers all working together to kind of solve this problem, and also kind of embrace and continue to drive the growth of EVs, which is what we want. So speaking of utilities, I was hoping we could talk a little bit about sort of best practices that you guys have seen that would kind of help our energy provider audience understand kind of what you guys feel is working from your perspective. So Sadia, do you want to start talking about successes that AutoGrid has had working with utilities and what you've seen in terms of charging solutions?
Yeah, so I think Maria touched upon the use of rate structures in combination with managed charging programs that utilities are deploying, right? So rate structures, they help influence behavior without having a technology solution to go with it. And the managed charging platforms and programs, such as the ones that AutoGrid delivers, where you're actually directly interfacing with the charger unit or through the charging provider platform as well. And with these kinds of programs, essentially you're accessing these EV loads, and if you do notice or do anticipate an untimely peak period, or whether it's located in a specific part of the network or system-wide, you can use or control these charges to be able to reduce the peak. On the opposite end of the spectrum, when you have increasing amounts of renewable energy on the system, like we talk about the duck curve in California, or excessive wind in the evenings as well, you can use these loads to be able to soak up some of that generation as well. So in that sense, with EVSEs, there is this flexibility that can be offered. In order to scale these programs, though, I think what works best is offering consumers the maximum choice. So what that means is that EVSE providers have to be agnostic to what managed charging platform they are going to use, whether it's their own or a third-party system. And on the other end, on the other side, the managed charging platform needs to be agnostic to what type of EVSE vendor they're working with. That's the only way this is going to work, because as there's a proliferation of EVs and more chargers, more brands, more systems in place, what we want to offer is maximum customer choice.
Yeah, thanks, Sadia, for breaking that down. And you bring up the consumer choice angle. That's going to be very important as more residences start using charging equipment at home. Maria, do you want to talk a little bit about the resi angle?
Yeah, and I'll actually, Sadia, you set me up, so I'm going to tee off of that as well. I completely agree with the consumer choice, right? From a residential perspective, something I'll note is that when you look at residential customer choices, they're not always logical, and residential customers aren't always going to be fully informed. So one thing I actually think is crucial is first ramping up the education for those customers, and then actually showing them the variety of choices that are available to them to participate in utility programs. More of a best practice I've seen utilities partaking in recently is sort of some experimental engagement with customers, because right now the volume of those residences with EVs is low. Now is the time to figure out, what do customers prefer? What is the flexibility we should offer? So that's one best practice. And then the other best practice, again, sort of teeing off this concept of customer choice, is that there are no two customers that are the same. And actually, as more and more folks purchase EVs, as we go away from these early adopters who maybe display similar behaviors, utilities should really account for the different kinds of customers that will be purchasing through 2025, through 2030, when they're designing these programs and trying to balance their grid. So in addition to offering customer choice, really think about the different types of customers who will be participating in these programs.
Yeah, that's a great point regarding the segmentation changing. I mean, like I was mentioning in our research, it's this young affluent urban group that we see is our high tech group. That's our early adopter group, right? And it can't be that energy providers, to your point, are designing all of their programs and education around Tesla owners and Nissan Leaf owners, because there's all other types. My dad's trying to buy one. He's an old man who lives in the suburbs. I mean, like it's a whole different scenario of trying to teach these people what the lifestyle is going to be like. Wow, I just said my dad is these people, which I will need to apologize for after. Not great. So in terms of education, that's something the utilities can be kind of helping with, especially on the CNI side. So So Jan, do you want to talk a little bit about how utilities can kind of advise fleet owners to set up their fleets right, basically for an EV transition?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think there's some parallels between consumer and fleet, is that fundamentally there is a lot of disinformation or lack of information, right? And so the capacity for utilities to serve as a trusted advisor is a big deal, right? So I'm not talking, of course, there's implementation, right? So optimization software and, electric rates or incentive plans, and a lot of utilities are developing that, right? So specific EV rates, and that open up a lot of opportunity for a lot of the companies that are on this panel. But before implementation, you have to start with decision. And beyond those early adopters, the second wave is going to need probably more hand-holding. And so on the consumer side, there's companies who provide calculators and decision tool systems, right, that can go online and you can kind of figure it out. But fleets are a lot more complex, right? They're not driving one vehicle, they're driving 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 vehicles. And they're operating different types of vehicles in different geographies, right? So the cost of electricity in Utah or in Minnesota or in Texas are completely different. And the rate structures and the types of vehicles and the climate. And so all of these variables are incredibly complex to model on your own. You can sort of try to create a spreadsheet, but you'd go insane, which is what a lot of fleet customers have told us they have gone insane. And so there's a real need to create a decision mechanism that enables fleets to make the right decisions. And if you put yourself in the shoes of a fleet operator, you have the fleet manager, you also have the facility manager, because they're going to have to deploy the chargers. You have the finance manager, you have the sustainability manager. Those four stakeholders really are going to influence that decision. And so this is one of the things we do for sure, is really like help them wade through this using our software and our customer success team. But I think it's really important to recognize that there is no amount of technology in the world that is going to, on its own, help a fleet sort of jump that process, right? And you really have to help them make decisions that then enable implementation. And consumers, somebody mentioned irrationality, right? Consumers can be irrational, right? We all buy, expensive German vehicles, etc., which is wonderful, right? I mean, that's everybody's choice, but it's somewhat irrational, right? You can get to the supermarket in a much cheaper vehicle if you want, right? But fleets don't operate like that. They're much more rational, right? They're using data, they're looking at operational reliability, they're looking at their cost control, they look at their budgetary performance, they're looking at how this is going to impact their operations. So they're very, very data-driven and very obsessed with risk mitigation, right? Those vehicles have to do their job, and they have to do it within a well-defined budget. And so, that's my ramble, is that utilities are recognizing this, and they're recognizing that they need decision tools that then enable everybody else on this call and others to then use their technology for the implementation and the day-to-day management of these vehicles. But you have to start with a decision, and utilities and their public utility regulators, the PUCs, are recognizing it, and you see more and more advisory and education programs that are PUC approved, rate case approved across the US.
So there's sort of one last piece of the puzzle, and Jan sort of calling out fancy German car makers got me thinking about, that they're the last piece, right? The actual OEMs, the automakers, and the auto dealers. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with this direct-to-consumer sales model, but also the OEMs are looking at the incentives that the government is offering and considering adding their own. So I wanted to kind of raise that issue. Louise, what do you think about the the kind of role of OEMs in terms of how they're going to be able to incentivize, and also the kind of the challenges that they're going to face as they try and sell their old ICEs next to the EVs, also using the old sales model. Also, like, warranties are complicated under EVs, repairs are super different. What do you think, as the kind of more frontline person? What do you think about how all that's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the landscape of how we acquire vehicles has changed, right? I think Tesla changed that with their dealership model. Now Ford just announced somehow something different as well. I'm very curious also to Jan's point about rationality of fleets, how they're going to be that rational with all this, now that you place these pre-sales, right, of vehicles you've never driven or tested before. Everybody's waiting for their F-150 Lightnings without really knowing the reliability and towing capacity and so on. There's going to be a lot of unanswered questions that will challenge that rationality from any type of new EV customer. And it's going to be an interesting challenge for all of us to solve from that standpoint. But I think the role from a manufacturer's side is to make sure what you're delivering is not just reliable, but also on time. I think also Tesla, as good as they've done to change the industry, they've also made us very much okay with waiting multiple months for things to be delivered and be ready. And certain, customers are okay with that. However, many of them are not, right? Specifically fleets, specifically customers that need these vehicles to do deliveries or urgent matters. I think when we were talking about preparing for the panel, and we were touching a little bit on V2G. It's definitely an interesting concept that should be looked at, and as an opportunity to be another way to de-stress the grid. Also to monetize the opportunity of having that load available for different utilities and use cases. But I mentioned at that time that it's also a big challenge that we still need to tackle. There's still too many questions unanswered on warranties, to your point, Chris, on the batteries, right? If you're charging and discharging a battery on an ongoing basis, it's not going to give you the mileage that was promised from the OEM perspective. Our customers are going to be okay with that. Our customers not going to be okay with that. And we're going to go into a model of replacing batteries and the same EV, which kind of would make more sense if we're going to go that route. The chargers, we get this question a lot. Is the charger V2G capable? We always say, like, we were one of the first ones working with Nuvve on doing V2G and proving the concept, but we're just a bridge. We're not enabling the flow of energy from the vehicle to the grid or to the home, for that matter. It's the vehicle that has to do this. So there's a lot of API, a lot of software development that needs to be tackled between all OEMs from the car perspective, from the charger perspective, from battery perspective, and then making sure that we're okay with the utility from cybersecurity standpoint and all of those matters that are important, right, for everybody's safety and for no concerns about playing with these types of loads. It's interesting, and I'm definitely going to be very excited to see how we all come out about solving this issue.
Yeah, so Sadia, I feel like you guys are pretty bullish on V2G. I thought I'd give you a chance to kind of chime in here, and especially since Luis brought up the Ford F-150, which I feel like the commercial during the Super Bowl had a big impact. It went from me telling people EVs were going to happen and everyone just basically rolling their eyes to believing it a little more. But a component of that was the V2G side. 120,000 people, something like that, are waiting for their Ford F-150 Lightnings, and I wonder if they think they're going to be doing vehicle to home. Do they know what demand response is? I don't know. What do you think, Sadia? What does AutoGrid think?
Yeah, so I think especially with the case of Ford F-150s and the Texas market specifically, the big interest is because resilience is an increasing cause of concern for a lot of end customers, and they're trying to figure out that, okay, if there's a blackout and I lose power from the grid, what sources do I have? And the big commercial and the big push that they were talking about was that we could power your a house for, I don't know what it was, like 5 to 7 days. I don't remember the exact figures. And that's basically flexibility. I mean, whether you offer it when the grid is off to the home or whether you offer it to the grid when the grid needs it, it's the same process, right? And I think people are starting to understand that a little bit better. And on the OEM side, I mean, a big reason for them to look at vehicle to grid types of opportunities and monetization opportunities is because their services revenues from EVs are going to be low to probably non-existent in a lot of cases. If I mean, I've had an EV for 4 years now. I've taken it for servicing twice, right? And it's not the same as having an ICE car. So OEMs are thinking about it in terms of how to offset this potential loss of revenue that comes when they electrify their production lines completely. Consumers are thinking about it because they're thinking about resiliency more and more, with more uncertainty, more extreme weather events. How do they manage that? How do they continue to operate under those conditions? And Jan was talking about fleets, and even with fleet owners and operators, absolutely, they are probably much more rational than an individual passenger trying to buy a vehicle because it's the next new thing and they can afford it, right? For them, everything is driven by operational cost. And through a platform like the one that AutoGrid offers, you're able to reduce their operational costs by optimizing when the charging is happening. So doing the charge management services, and then offering them an opportunity to monetize the additional flexibility. And additional is an operative word here because it's not the main use of the fleet, but it's what you could potentially access under certain circumstances. And the other, I think, Louis, you were talking about warranties and how often do you charge and discharge for grid services, etc. In a season, when you're talking about demand response and offering flexibility through those types of mechanisms, you're maybe calling upon these customers, I don't know, 8 to 10 times in a season at most, probably not as much. And if you have enough flexible capacity, you don't need to always go back to the same set of assets. So there's a lot of things that you can do there to reduce the impact on customers, but still offer them the option to be able to monetize it. So I think that when we say V2G, the perception is that you're going to do it very, very often, but even traditional programs, you're not doing it more than 8 to 10 times in the season, maybe at most 20 times a year. So the impacts are likely to be less onerous than what people imagine with these types of programs.
Yeah, I mean, all of our demand response research that we do, I mean, it centers around thermostats right now, obviously, but at our other Smart Energy Summit content that we're doing that's not about EVs, we talk a lot about how really happy people are generally with their demand response participation. And it really kind of exists as this like boogeyman fear that the utilities are going to ruin everything. But as a Texan, you mentioned earlier, I'm scared they're going to ruin everything by having a blackout. So we're trying to figure out how to make it work from that perspective. Jan, go ahead.
Yeah, just two thoughts, right? One is that what Sadia was talking about is a big deal, right? Like we have software that defines managed and unmanaged energy costs for some of our clients for their sites, right? And the demand charge impact on some of these can be huge, right? So the real, when you pump gasoline or diesel into a truck, whether you're doing that at 3 o'clock in the morning or at lunchtime or in the afternoon, doesn't really change the price, right? I mean, next year it might be a lot more expensive, but during the day it doesn't change, right? But in the electric world, that's completely different, and we're all cognizant of this on this webinar. But fleets don't operate like that. So this is a whole new world, and it's so complex that it does need to be automated. And so that impact is really, really significant and incredibly meaningful, especially when you think about the fact that there are millions or maybe tens of millions of EVs on the road between consumer and fleets. Letting consumers or fleets manage that themselves becomes really complex. That being said, I do have a little pet peeve on resiliency. It is a big source of anxiety for fleets. But if there's a power outage and there's an ice storm, you can't go to a gas station and buy diesel or gasoline anyway because there's like 600 other vehicles ahead of you, and then they ran out and the trucks couldn't get through. So like electricity, sounds a little scary, but gasoline or liquid fuel is not that easy if you have a like an outage or a storm.
Right, that's a great point. If the roads are out, then maybe you're better off having a juice box and generator or storage, solar and storage. We'll talk about that next time.
Maybe. Right.
So this has been a great discussion. I want to, since we only have 5 minutes left, I want to make sure we get some audience questions in because we have a ton of audience questions. So a bunch of them center around this issue of it's sort of about equity. It's sort of about what is the vehicle mix going to look like in the next couple of years? Who's going to make the $25,000 car? How is that going to work? But the first kind of hurdle that we're looking at right now is this idea of the government incentive and who's going to get it. So Maria, we've talked in the past about kind of equity on kind of price points. So I thought I would put this to you. So first of all, can you predict what's happening in Washington? Because that'd be awesome.
No.
What's going to happen? What if you tried harder? Could you? No? Okay. The next piece is like how. So assuming that these incentive plans pass, how is this going to impact the sort of product mix? It's going to. I see it taking down the disadvantage that GM and Tesla were suddenly about to have when they were not going to be able to offer the incentives and everyone else was. But maybe that does or doesn't matter based on what models they have. So what do you think, Maria, in terms of this equity issue and less expensive cars and more lower income people taking advantage of the incentives?
Yeah, first I'm actually going to tackle the equity because I also think that's a key thing when we think about the different segments of customers that are even able to get an EV right now. It is somewhat obvious that low income users are left out of this mix, at least with the current vehicle mix. I think two things. One, I actually think we need to be driving that secondary market stronger. Unfortunately, right now, used cars are crazy. And so even a used EV is not really affordable. But honestly, the more incentives available, the more we will drive that secondary market. And so I think we should work to continue to drive an affordable used EV as well as affordable new EVs on the road. On the new EV front, I'm very hopeful, given a lot of the new models coming out, Hyundai, Subaru, Chevy, GM, able to use that incentive again, are going to be huge. And you already see EV prices coming down to the 20s. I think maybe we're not there yet, but it's pretty close. And so I'm less worried about the manufacturers because I think they're all planning on developing a vehicle that will be at that price point. More worried about the policy that we can do to support the low income purchase. The incentive, I think I can't predict Washington. I actually live right next to Washington, D.C. I live in Arlington, but you know what? I think I'm more confused than everyone else in the country. I can't predict what's going to happen. I am, like you, very hopeful. So I do think should that succeed, then it actually would drive equity, right? By now Tesla, not so much, but allowing GM, especially such a huge manufacturer coming out with those, I would say, more affordable vehicles that are electrified, allowing that incentive to continue, in my opinion, would be huge. So, fingers crossed. I am hopeful that they'll make the right decision.
Yeah, the secondary market thing is really interesting. Also, GM making like $25,000 volts or bolts. I can never remember whichever volt model is going to be one of the first cheap ones. And I think there's also going to be entrants at some point from global car makers. People in Southeast Asia, for example, are already making really cheap EVs. Maybe we start riding electric motorcycles too. That would be cool. I would be scared, but I'm a coward, so whatever. Cool people can ride electric motorcycles instead, and that would be a way of doing electrification. So I want to get one last question in. We have like 1 second, unless, Jan, you were nodding emphatically. Did you want to comment on that next one? Okay, so let's see. So Louise, I want to give you this one. The cost of chargers, right? So people need to do, unless they're using a new house that is built in California with all the right standards and stuff like that, there's a chance that you have to come in and do some electrical work in terms of putting a charger on your wall. So that becomes kind of a issue too. If your $600 juice box starts to be a $1,000 expenditure, maybe my wife tells me, no, I'm not allowed to do it. So what do you think about the sort of where is the cost going to go? Is there going to be cheaper models? I'm starting to see some new cheap products online that are kind of a different form factor, different ways to charge at like a level 2 level. So what do you think about kind of the future of charging in the resi area in terms of sort of cheaper? How is this going to evolve so that everyone can get involved?
Yeah, I think that would be the goal, right? To keep on improving the charger while making it cheaper, or at least not making it more expensive, which is something we recently had to do, just with overall inflation and things being more expensive. Now it's a $700 charger, Chris, not $600. But yeah, I agree. Today, with all the incentives that exist from utilities in most places, anywhere ranging from $300 to $500 on the hardware side of things, most customers can't afford, to pay $150, $200 for their charger out of pocket, let's say. So it makes it not such a complicated purchasing decision. But to your point, nobody really thinks about the panel upgrade that you're most likely going to need, and it's going to be more on the thousands of dollars. And that's still something that a lot of utilities are not incentivizing. Some of them, like mine, I won't tell you who it is, offered me like $200 for my $4,000 required upgrade. So, when you put that in perspective, like $200, if I'm already going to spend $4K, doesn't really move the needle in terms of, incentivizing me to do so. But then we see on the other side, utilities where the regulators allow for it to own and operate chargers at single family homes. So the utility themselves are bringing the box. We partner with them. They use our technology. They charge you anywhere from $30 to $40 a month for your charger. They include the installation. They send it with their own certified electricians to make sure the job is done well. And they include full unlimited charging during off-peak times. Those programs have proved to be extremely successful, make the decision for any EV driver easy, seamless. The utilities get the benefit from managed charging. You get the benefit from making sure the installation is done securely and properly. I feel like if regulators across the country could allow for these programs a little bit more and be more flexible, then the easier you make it for the EV driver to I think it was I don't know if it was Sadie or Maria who was saying that residential customers might not be as educated, and that's just what it is. The easier you make it, the better, right? So hopefully we can get to these programs where we don't even have to talk about the price of the charger. It's just a subscription thing that you have, and you have unlimited charging. So that offsets the value of having to pay a monthly fee for it. And also, of course, focusing on low income and how we're going to tackle that charging and bring them something of value, right, of having these chargers. So I don't know if the price exactly will come down to $200 or something like that. We're definitely trying to make strides into designing what's coming, right? Juicebox, next versions of it, smaller footprints, maybe like a light version of it. I think that's going to end up happening, right? Having multiple options. Like if you want to go on the cheaper side, you may lose some of features, but really you just want to charge your car. So how much of a feature can you lose? So it's going to be a fun thing to keep on looking into.
Hey, on that topic, I want to do a shameless shout out, right? Because our sister company, our parent company is NextEra Energy that owns Florida Power and Light, and Florida Power and Light and Enel. So Luis's colleagues have a program, a pilot program which I think is $38 per month, including the charger, the installation, the permitting, and unlimited off-peak charging. So probably nights and weekends. I don't know the details, but
that was me, Jen. I can tell you all the details.
Oh, you didn't have to. But I know, of course, I love my sister companies. But I think that's as a consumer, that's pretty exciting.
All right,
yeah,
cool.
I always compare that to my utility and having nothing. And they say, if you come with me and offer me $40 a month, I'll take it tomorrow. Like, tell me where to sign. And it's not happening for me, unfortunately. I'm going to move to Florida soon.
So so we're getting a little bonus time here, so I have a chance to ask another question. So this is a hard one. So let's see who can be brave. Battery second life. So we talk about a lot, like Luis brought up earlier. How are we, when we wear batteries out, either because we're doing demand response or because we're just driving our cars until the batteries are done. What are you guys seeing in terms of good work that's going on, planning for battery second life? Or are we looking at a scenario where it's just going to have to be we suck it up for a minute with this sort of generation of batteries, and that there's going to be some new technology in the future that's going to make batteries that we can kind of be a little more green about how we're disposing of them? Who wants to be brave? Maria, Jan, go for it.
I'll go quick. I'm not so sure this is actually necessary, because the actual life of a battery, even with degradation, fits a lot of use cases, right? So if you're a FedEx delivery van in Manhattan, you're doing 10 miles a day, right? So that battery can last a long time before that vehicle is no longer useful in these applications, right? And as consumers, we also, not all of our vehicles, but many households with 2 or 3 vehicles will have one that's just going to Walmart or to school or something, right? So I think the life use of an EV might be a lot longer than we think, right? Number one. And number two, there is a huge industry, Koch Industries and Redwood Materials and others, who are building up businesses specifically for the purpose of recycling batteries. So not second life, but recycling. So to Maria.
I don't really have an answer to this. It's just out of my own curiosity about the industry. I actually completely agree with Jan, because the best thing I've seen on reuse is actually like the aggregation of multiple used batteries to form sort of a flexible resource, right? Which, interesting idea. I don't think that's a long-term solution. So I was also going to bring up there's a lot of research and like actually people ramping up like scalable recycling. I think that's ideal, just going forward.
I mean, and who knows how the industry is going to evolve, right? Like, there's also a lot of talk about how you swap out batteries instead of having to wait for the 20 minutes it takes to charge it fully, or whatever that timeline is for at supercharging stations, or at any such facility, right? So I think it's probably a little bit too early to say what the final fully realized EV economy and infrastructure is going to look like. So maybe second life batteries will play a part in there. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be used for something else entirely. I think it's a little bit of crystal gazing at this point.
All right. So on the topic of sort of the value of EV batteries as just batteries, what about the idea of 24/7 sort of interaction, two-way interaction with the cars as another, I think, kind of potentially far future? Tell me if this is far future, as opposed to an energy company calling an event. I mean, it'll probably be Texas, right? So my desperate grid drawing on my hypothetical Ioniq 5 that I want someday, if they ever make that possible for me to buy one. What do you think, Maria? Is there ever going to be demand response 24/7? Is that?
I have a quick comment actually from the consumer perspective and keeping things simple. I think very few consumers would actually enjoy that experience unless it was extremely well designed. So I have like a lot of pause around that 24/7. But I do think that what you'll see, and maybe less with V2G, but more acceptance of the automation. And so comfort with more regular control of the vehicle. Again, not V2G. I think I have reserves about that. But I do think that's something that's essential to our future, is just allowing the customer to be more okay with the 24/7 touch of the utility.
Yeah. And I don't think you'll need to interact with the EV battery 24/7 for demand response purposes. I think even with all the renewables coming into the system and multiple flexible energy resources in the system, you're not going to need this all the time. It's just, you're going to need that flexibility for intermittent periods of time. And I think where the 24/7 aspect does come into play and help is if you have some visibility into what the EV owner needs. Like when do they need to leave? When do they need to stop charging? How much charge do they need? And incorporate that information to account for which vehicle to discharge when for what purpose, right? Like I think that's the value of the two-way interaction. I don't think you're going to need to really control the vehicle 24/7 for flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about home energy management implications all the time in demand response, and it's an extra weird one when you're talking about EVs because, you know, the grid doesn't know that you're planning a car trip tomorrow, so maybe it doesn't let you charge overnight because whatever, wind wasn't going very well, so the grid was taxed, or there was, you know, maybe it was a heat wave, some situation like that. So I'm looking forward to some drama 2 days before Thanksgiving or something like that in 2023, right? But so I'm glad we kind of ended on a note talking about consumers and thinking about the future, because I think a bunch of those conversations are going to come up with our keynote that's coming up next. To see Colleen is here, so I'm going to transition away to the discussion between leader from ChargePoint, Colleen Jansen, and my boss Elizabeth Parks. I really appreciate everyone being here. The conversation was awesome. I could talk about this forever, but you guys all have busy lives, and so I'm just going to go back to my charts now. And I will turn it over. But I appreciate all you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. That was a great conversation, and I am excited to follow it up with Colleen Jansen, Chief Marketing Officer of ChargePoint. She has a wealth of experience in clean energy technology and leads all global marketing, communications, and public policy. Colleen, thank you so much for joining us today. There is a lot to talk about. For the audience, please be sure to send in any questions as we're going, and I'll work to weave them in the conversation. We're going to focus a little bit on the evolution of EVs, where growth is coming from, the role of funding investments, and private and public partnerships. So let's get started, Colleen, with a short intro from you, your role at ChargePoint, and also the position that ChargePoint has in the market.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's great to be here. Just a little bit about me. I am a marketer in Silicon Valley. My career is all around creating new categories and making new technologies really mainstream. So I've been driving electric since 2011. So I came to this early, really more of as an experiment than anything else. And fast forward in time, I was actually able to make something that I was personally interested in part of my professional journey. So at ChargePoint, all we do is power movement around the planet. If it's a person or a package that needs to be moved, we want to power it. So we've been at this for 15 years and we kind of eat, sleep, live, breathe EV charging, if you will. So we're the largest network across North America and Europe, and we operate in dozens of countries, just powering the vehicles that move people and packages.
Well, that's great. Well, let's start out with some of your own experiences as an EV driver and maybe how you see that evolution occurring with, the rest of the consumers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the first thing that I realized as a consumer is that fueling is fundamentally different in an electric vehicle. And there's two real tenets that are core to understand. One is that electricity is already pervasively distributed. So all of the electricity that we know powers the world around us can also be leveraged for fueling. And the other tenet is that vehicles spend the majority of their useful life, over 90% of the time, not moving a person or a package around the planet. So that means that fueling can really happen while you're doing something else. Number one, because the electricity is pervasively distributed already. And two, because most of the time you're not in your vehicle, in the case of passenger vehicles. So that dwell time and that electricity network that's already built out really makes a great opportunity for fueling. And we all know time is the new commodity, right? So why not charge up while you're doing something else? So the challenge that brings in as a marketer is that you're basically creating a change, a disruption in patterns that have worn their groove over many, many years, right? We've had over 100 years of driving around until the little yellow light comes on and then pulling over and making a separate stop. And EV fueling changes a lot of that because number one, it's a top-up model. Most people, other than the occasion where you drive beyond your battery range, most people are just going to replace what they use as they use it. For Americans, that's about a 10 or 12 mile commute each way. And so what we see with residential charging is that drivers are basically topping up or replacing what they use as they use it. And it's gone to a big battery BEV market. And that means most vehicles have hundreds of miles of range that are being introduced to consumers now. And the other big change that's happened over recent years is we finally have, a vehicle that fits every type. We all know that we buy vehicles based on, what we want to get out of them in terms of utility, but also vehicles that suit our lifestyle. So it's not a luxury market any longer. It's, vehicles in all form factors. It's, efficient small vehicles, it's luxury sedans, it's pickup trucks. And then of course on the delivery logistics fleet side, it's city buses, it's the box trucks, the last mile delivery, it's the shuttle vans, it's all of it electrifying.
Well, yeah, and so on the consumer side, we do see consumers starting to become more familiar with this idea of electric vehicles and, intentions to purchase, certainly those who already have one looking to, upgrade or replace. But we also know that a lot of the growth is being driven by the commercial or enterprise market with some of the fleets that you're talking about. Can you share how dramatic the changes are in the commercial side and how that you see that tying into the consumer market?
Yeah, what's interesting is we've seen that there are, we often have people come to our headquarters. We have an interoperability lab where all the vehicles come in for testing. And that could be, a large city bus, it could be an 18-wheeler. And very often we'll have visitors at our campus and they'll say, wow, this is really interesting to see all these vehicles here. When did these hit the road? When will these be deployed, at volume? And then we pull them around to the front of the vehicle and we say, see all the bugs on the front of this shuttle van, bus, box truck? That vehicle was just on the road doing its route. And so what's a little bit unexpected is that because the vehicles don't look meaningfully different, unlike the early stages of consumer passenger EVs, we're not always noticing that a lot of what's hitting the roads is electric. So, we're at double digits, percentage of new car sales that are electric across the geographies in which we operate. So increasingly, vehicle manufacturers have been making, same model in ICE as well as EV. And so there's not necessarily the, hey, that looks different factor. And we're seeing that fleets are electrifying really because, number one, they can get their hands on the vehicles now, but also because it's just, massively reduced total cost of ownership because of the lower, maintenance associated with them, but also the lower cost of fueling. So, fleets tend to make decisions based on, operations, maintenance fit with their organization. And it really is a software game, ensuring that all of the vehicles are charged up, ready for their routes or the work that they have to do, and integrating to software makes all of that possible. So that could be, route scheduling. It could be integrating with fleet cards so that if the driver needs to fuel up while they're en route and avail themselves of that public charging network, they can do so. So, it really does start with the vehicles. And of course, you need great charging stations, but really it's the software that makes all of that work for business.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about the charging stations and the availability. This is something we're reading a lot about in the news. I just read that there are about 58,000 charging stations in the US. 59,000 was the number I read, and that the goal is to get to 500,000 charging stations. So that's, we're maybe 10% of where we want to be. And so can you kind of lay out some of the plans that you all have in terms of maybe where you're prioritizing adding charging stations, the role of the rural communities and how that's playing out, whether you're seeing demand there yet, or kind of the perspective there when you look at the different types of environments that consumers and businesses are operating in?
Sure. So I think one of the challenges with the port count associated with EV charging is that you really have to look at what are all the ports out there. And at ChargePoint, we operate in all categories of charging. So that's charging where you sleep, right? That's residential. That could be those who live in an apartment or a condominium. That could be those who have the luxury of living in a single family home. So whether you're in shared housing or your own housing with dedicated parking, we're in the residential charging business. Those ports don't tend to be counted in the publicly accessible numbers because, I don't have people pulling up to my driveway to use my home charger. Now, that's residential is one category. Commercial is another. So that's workplace charging, public around town charging, hospitals, medical plazas, retail, hospitality, arenas, stadiums, etc., parking operators. That's that whole commercial segment. And those tend to be mostly public ports. So they're counted in those public data sets that, we tap in with AltFuels data center and those kinds of things. Now, some of those ports might be semi-private. So it might be a workplace that says, hey, I want charging during business hours to be accessible to my employees, but in off hours, weekends, nights, depending on their operation, maybe they want to make those ports of charging accessible to the public. And so that's what we call semi-public. And software, by the way, is what makes all of that happen. And then the third category is fleet, as I was mentioning earlier. So that could be, city buses, ride share, delivery, logistics, last mile, shuttles, etc. And most of those ports are not publicly reported. At ChargePoint, we have over 188,000 places to charge on our network, and we roam with over 300,000. So that means one set of ChargePoint credentials can give you access to other networks. So our 188,000 places to charge spans the, those public ports that I mentioned around, apartments, condominiums, et cetera, as well as what's happening in commercial and fleet. Now, to your question about the role of government funding and charging infrastructure and what's going on with the Biden-Harris administration, we have been partnering with those in federal government to bring all of this insight, right? All we do is EV charging, and we're in all categories of it. So we have a lot of resulting insight from the data of 15 years of seeing where do businesses want to put in charging? How does it work? What are the best use cases? So as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Biden-Harris administration has a goal of 500,000 places to charge along America's highways and in communities. And so in the coming months, they're going to be rolling out the funds associated with that build out. And we've been active partners with the federal government since before that bipartisan infrastructure law was passed. And the NEVI program includes many of the best practices that we've really developed and advocated for over the last 15 years. So we've been working with the states to make sure that we can put the NEVI program into practice. And if you're interested, I could share more about some of the recent examples of public-private partnerships working together in shared housing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you all just announced something in the state of California. So if you want to maybe dive in there a little, that would be great.
Sure. So as I mentioned up front, cars spend a lot of their time parked, and electricity is pervasively distributed. And that means that having the convenience of charging where you sleep makes a lot of sense. And we know that a lot of the world lives in shared housing. And so the recent California Energy Commission grant was focused on multifamily homes. So we are working with the nonprofit Charge Across Town, as well as the state of California through the California Energy Commission, to deploy hundreds of charging stations at apartment buildings and condominiums across the state. So what this means is that many Californians will have access to charging, and 75% of that is reserved for low income and disadvantaged communities. So we know that an investment from the CEC, $4 million to install this charging, is going to make it easier for people to, leave their place of living every morning with a full battery, which means they can get to work, they can go about their day. And we know that those that live in low income disadvantaged communities often have the least agency when it comes to their air quality. So I think that recent example from California Energy Commission and CEC gives a great example of how benefits like these can come to communities and really be a showcase of what's possible, because so much of the world lives in shared housing.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, especially in thinking about multifamily and that ability to scale, just to serve a large group of people. Can you talk a little bit about the Starbucks partnership? I know that is another one that is recent. We just have a few minutes left, but I think this is an important one to touch on as well.
Yeah, so our partnership with Starbucks and Volvo, we're really excited about, because I like to think of this as reimagining the road trip. So, I have been driving electric for a long time, started out with, a vehicle that didn't have as much range. And now we know that vehicles that have hundreds of miles of range really create, road trip experiences that can make the electric lifestyle possible. And I like to think of this partnership with Volvo and Starbucks as really reinventing what it means to make a stop along the way. So I have a dog. I'm always looking for a little grassy spot, some shade, something to do while I, maybe need to charge up for 20 or 30 minutes, because it's that rare occasion when I've actually driven beyond my battery range. And, it's not Slim Jims and grimy bathrooms anymore. It's Wi-Fi, it's lovely coffees, and it's great experiences powered by folks like Volvo and Starbucks, and really making charging at those locations accessible to drivers of all vehicle brands. And so I think you're going to see more and more of this, where businesses realize that charging is good for them. It's great for foot traffic. And we see this every day. Our customers tell us, we love having EV charging. It is a symbol of progress. It's good for our brand, our customers, our employees, our tenants love it. And this is something that we've seen over and over, which is that businesses have realized that charging is really good for their business. And in fact, we count 76% of the Fortune 50 as ChargePoint customers. So I think you're going to see more of this sort of thing with retailers, where charging just works for business and it's great for drivers as well.
Well, yeah, and that's an awesome example, especially if you think about these brands and the crossover opportunities to bring in new consumer segments and also really meet consumers where they're at. I mean, if you have an EV, you expect certain technology in place because you probably are an early adopter of technology. So there's a lot that can go along with that. And certainly ChargePoint is leading the way in powering America. And really want to thank you for your time today. We just have a final few minutes if you'd like to share your view of the future of charging, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how quickly things might or might not take place as your final comments.
Sure. So one of the things that I love to see is this evolution of, having adopted an EV very early on in 2011 as an experiment. And now, at the time I was thinking, where am I going to charge? How is this going to work? And increasingly, I just think of it as, well, I'm just going to take charging with me. And this is what I think people don't realize. It's, starting a charging session with my watch. I've got the mobile app. I can tap to charge. I can find charging. Increasingly, it's this ambient experience that's just part of your day-to-day experience. So it's in your Apple Maps. It's in Google Maps. It's actually integrated into your vehicle's infotainment system. It's, Alexa, how many miles have I added with my home charger? So it's voice, it's in car, it's wearables, it's in the popular apps that we all know and love. It's using your digital payment technologies. So not only is driving electric, feels like you're part of the future, but it's increasingly integrated into the lifestyle, into those popular platforms that we've all chosen of, our mobile apps, our wearables. And software is the thing that makes all of that possible. So, deciding when to charge, scheduling my charging when it's least expensive, making sure I get a reminder so that I don't leave in the morning without a full battery. Those kinds of things are increasingly providing convenience benefits that we just never even thought of with liquid fueling, because we forgot about all those practical limitations we had associated with liquid fuels.
Yeah, certainly connectivity is changing everything. And from the big picture, we are entering into the fourth industrial revolution, where connectivity and data and the cloud and integration of devices and services are really creating new experiences that truly are changing our world. So, Colleen, I want to thank you for joining us today. And you have just a wealth of experience sharing with our audience. So thank you again for your time, and I hope to see you in person next time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really enjoyed it.
Great. And if you stick with us for just a few more minutes, we'll be right back with our next session featuring Jason Paris, our Vice President of Business Development, and our panelists talking more about charging stations and infrastructure.
Hi, welcome back to Smart Energy Summit. I'm Jason Paris, Vice President here at Parks Associates. Have a great panel to end our day today. It's related to breaking barriers, infrastructure, and charging stations. So first, I'd like to share a little consumer data. If you're not familiar with Parks, we're a market research firm. We have a ton of consumer data, both in the connected home space, home energy management space, and EV space. So what does this chart say? This is a comparison of the end of the year 2020 to the end of this last year. Charging, consumer charging has raised pretty much in every way. About half of the owners say they're charging their vehicles daily. The type of batteries common to EVs charge fastest between 20 and 80%. Maintaining a charge above 20% is also better for the lifespan of the battery. So more frequent charging is best for the practice. So where are they charging? Well, home and work primarily. So the public space is the space that we've been talking a lot about today, where consumers do have some anxiety if they're away from home or work. Can they find a place when they need it? That range, 41 to 51%, is because we asked about different places in public. So, you know, Walgreens versus Kroger, et cetera. So this was alluded to in the previous session, about 50,000 public charging locations in the US right now. This is from the US Department of Energy Alternative Fuel Data Center. And so this is enough for the current use of electric vehicles, but going forward, we obviously need to ramp up. So where are we going to get the help? Well, Big Brother, Uncle Sam. So of course, Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan got whittled down, but did pass. And the good news is network of electric vehicle chargers is part of the funding. And so just this week, there was a deadline for all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico to submit their plans for deploying EV charging infrastructures in their locations. And I understand that they've all made the deadline. The first $5 billion of funding is now up for grabs, with the national goal of 500,000 EV chargers deployed this decade. So as we look to the future, we have to reimagine our road and highway system. The new program requires charging stations no more than 50 miles apart, with preferences for placement along the interstate highway system. So a lot of challenges, not only deploying the large volume of chargers, but deploying them in a smart manner. The public charging network is growing. Deals are in place and projects are underway to build more public charging situated next to commercial spaces. Consumers will see chargers at more public locations, including shopping centers, Walgreens, Whole Foods, and Kroger, entertainment venues like Cinemark theaters, gas stations. But there's a long way to go to meet existing and future needs, and it's a complicated process. The panel is going to talk about that today and the different approaches to meet similar goals. So we are honored and very excited to have Srijata from Volta Charging, Evan from GridPoint, Rebecca from Blink Charging, Stacy from ICF, and with the utility angle, Sophia from Eversource Energy. Again, I'm Jason Paris, and I would like to for each panelist to take a couple minutes to introduce their company and their role in the company. So Srijata, let's bring you in and start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for the intro. I lead our corporate strategy and corporate development teams here at Volta, and we are a public charging network, primarily L2, but rapidly building out our DC footprint. We are present across, half the states in America with over, with 2,500-ish units in. With various partners that where consumers we feel go to work, play, shop, and really, in hearing Colleen speak in the last session, it really is for us about how do we work EV charging seamlessly into your day. So the way that we, plan our network is through our proprietary predictive platform. Our belief is that by using this data-driven approach, we can plan the infrastructure alongside municipalities, utilities, and our site partners intelligently, efficiently, and equitably, as we do believe that access to EV charging is important for everyone increasingly. And to that end, we have a diversified revenue stack where we primarily make money from our media screens on the stations, as you can see here in the picture. And our hope and our plan is to develop this infrastructure in a way that allows us to make money in different ways, such that we can create this equitable future for EV charging.
Thank you, Sujata. Evan.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, my name is Evan Conley. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at GridPoint. And GridPoint is really a leading energy management company for, I'd say, some of the small to mid-sized commercial customers that I think you actually mentioned on some of your previous slides. And really, so you can think about retailers, restaurants, even auto dealerships. And so why are we here, right? Because as consumers continue the adoption of electric vehicles, it's having a profound effect on the businesses that they shop at, that they frequent, and not only in terms of the infrastructure that's needed to support EV charging at those locations, but also kind of the expectations of the brands that they interact with. And so on the infrastructure side, some of our customers are putting EV charging posts in their parking lot, and there's different impacts, whether it's metered behind the building or kind of who pays for the actual charging itself. But just as interestingly, right, there's operational charging, and this is, you can think of an auto dealership that has EV inventory on the site, or a restaurant that has an electric delivery fleet. There's those large new loads that are going into these commercial properties. How is that managed? And what we believe at GridPoint is that it's a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of a new energy consuming asset type at a building that can further our ability to make buildings a grid interactive resource, a reliable resource for utility partners. And there's a couple wins, because that provides not only energy savings to the customers, whether it's the end users or the building's property owners themselves, but also from a decarbonization perspective, sustainability perspective, to anyone in that local jurisdiction. So you'll hear me talk about both of those kind of, I'd say, infrastructure and operational considerations in further discussion points. But I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the time.
Great, thank you for that. And that was a very interesting point about the brand interaction. So look forward to diving into that in a little bit. Next, Rebecca Gutierrez from Blink Charging.
Thank you, Jason. Hey, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to participate. Very excited to be here. I represent Blink Charging. We are a global leader in EV charging. So we have a footprint across 20 plus countries at this point. We have offices in 6 different countries and are really dedicated to making EV charging accessible. So you heard Colleen just a little bit earlier talking about range anxiety. Well, we like to turn that around and say we're building range confidence, and we're doing it not just in the United States, but we're really doing it on a global scale. So to date, we've been around for a little while. We were founded in 2009, have deployed nearly 50,000 chargers since we've started back in the early days when people weren't sure if electric vehicles were going to catch on, and have now really grown into a formidable force. We are very happy to sit here and talk about the future, because the future is very bright and it is coming at us very, very quickly. We are definitely ready. We're growing organically and through M&A activity as well. So very much representative of kind of growing to meet the rapid demand that has been created now as all the consumers look to electric vehicles.
Great, and yes, we will certainly be talking about the future, as it's certainly upon us. Stacy.
Jason, good to be with you all. My name is Stacy Noblet. I'm the Vice President of Transportation Electrification for ICF. ICF is a global consulting firm involved in countless different markets, but my area of expertise is clean fuels, clean transportation. The company has many years of experience serving utilities and government clients in particular. For more than 20 years, we've been focused across the clean transportation space. And of course, electric vehicles weren't always as hot of a topic as they are today. So we're drawing from experience with natural gas and propane and other clean fuel types. Adding to that expertise is our years of delivering programs for utilities, and more specifically with electric vehicles, we're working with utilities to help design and implement some of the rebate and make-ready and utility-owned and operated EV charging programs that we're seeing become more popular. And also involved in fleet electrification on behalf of utilities, as well as working directly with fleets to help assess and understand the opportunities for electrification, and then advise on some of the infrastructure that's needed to move those projects along. So a couple of the utilities that we're working with, certainly not a comprehensive list, but just a few names. And that's all built on the foundation of working with the National Alternative Fuels Data Center. You saw the map from Jason earlier. My team has the pleasure of building that database out and has worked closely with the National Renewable Energy Lab for many years. Also partnering with the National Park Service and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, to name a few other ways that we're involved. So looking forward to the discussion today and bringing some of the lessons we've learned.
All right, thank you for that. And Sophia with Eversource.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Zhang. I am a senior data scientist in Eversource Energy. We are a utility company that serves the New England area in 3 states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. So as a utility, our mandate is to supply energy to all of our customers reliably and sustainably. And at Eversource, my primary role is to assess electrical demand and forecast system load in the short term and long term. So this has a focus on new technology adoption like EVs. So this is to ensure that we take the necessary measures to upgrade our energy infrastructure and integrate distributed generation resources to make us ready for the new waves of electrification that is coming. So we strive to make our operations and strategy align with the direction set out by the regulatory bodies and to advance the state and federal goals for decarbonization. So this will be a very interesting perspective, I think, to get the charging and the utility side to anticipate the impact of EVs on the grid. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sophia. Yeah, we certainly want to hear more about your kind of thoughts on projections for the the impact on the grid. First, just like to start to understand how you guys describe the state of the current charging national charging system. It's obviously sufficient for enthusiasts, but also it's considered a barrier for adoption of EV. How would you describe it? And I'll throw it out to anyone who wants to open.
Jason, I'm happy to jump in just from a broad perspective. I think, like you said, there's a lot of dots on that map. And for EV drivers like Colleen, we heard her previously, she's one of the early ones. EV drivers are generally very technically savvy, and also probably pretty patient and understanding about some of the issues that they might encounter as they're navigating this emerging world with technology changing so rapidly. But we need to look a little further on and understanding that the more EV drivers we have, the more issues they'll encounter. And so we've the leading edge is the bleeding edge in many respects of this industry. And so as the infrastructure providers are building out more of the charging stations, reliability and redundancy will be increasingly important. So making sure that we're working through the kinks now as best as possible, sharing insights and lessons to help get ready for the next wave, this growing number of EV drivers.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Stacy. It's We're kind of at a hybrid time where we're maturing on the infrastructure side. Certainly, the new infrastructure coming online and the incentives for that infrastructure is very exciting, and it's getting infrastructure put in at a much quicker pace. The company, us and Volta and ChargePoint are all working very quickly to make it more convenient and more accessible. But a really key point that Stacy touched on is really that reliability factor. And that's something that I think the industry hasn't been typically focused on and is now very much in the limelight. As owners and operators, that's something we certainly care to pay attention to because we're the ones operating the equipment. But I do think that is going to eventually ease itself out as more owners and operators come online.
Yeah, I'll absolutely echo what Rebecca and Stacy have said. And on the, I think maintenance and uptime is on everyone's mind. And, it's easy to forget because Blink has been around for a long time, doing this great work and building out globally their network. And Volta has been around for, a decade plus. The thing is that it's easy to forget that we're still kind of at the beginning of this. And a lot of the technology is still being developed. It's not, it's not perfectly off the shelf, right? And so this is really such an ecosystem where the hardware OEMs are, big partners in helping us understand the equipment and how to keep it working. Of course, our utility partners in making sure that we are bringing these assets onto the grid in a responsible way, but quickly in keeping up with the fact that EVs are coming. And I think that, I'm so excited to be part of this panel because we all play a part, in making this successful in the future. At Volta, we really do believe that, the rising tide raises all boats, with government funding coming in, with more OEMs getting into the game and developing more reliable L2 assets, but also DCFC assets here and in Europe and across the world. And we're all, chipping away at this, but that's where, I see this exciting future. Someone said something about the next big industrial revolution, and it kind of is that, right? It requires everyone to be all hands on deck to make this work.
So for EVs to truly become mass market, obviously we need to expand our infrastructure to rural areas. So how would you describe current approaches to dense urban areas, to suburban areas, and sparse rural areas?
I can get us started on that one. So certainly all eyes right now are on the build out in the dense urban areas. That's where the most movement has been made throughout the decade as we were starting to deploy equipment. But now really it's a very real conversation about what do we do about the rural areas? What do we do about the areas that do not have the electrical capacity? And I think that's where you're going to find the most exciting technology advancements. I know we're working on an off-grid charging system that can help bring chargers to those locations. I'm sure many other infrastructure companies are doing very similar research and development activities because this is going to be a need. It's interesting, just this week, Illinois and Wisconsin, my home state, partnered with Michigan as well to electrify around Lake Michigan. And they're doing that in an effort as a tourist amenity, if you will. If you've ever been to northern Michigan or northern Wisconsin, you'll know it's not heavily populated. It's extremely seasonal, very, very beautiful, but they're going to need those kinds of creative technical solutions for these really rural areas.
And I can continue on what Rebecca said. Rebecca talked about being creative with new technologies to support these more sparse areas. And that's exactly what a utility is looking into right now. So at Eversource, there's two challenges with building out in a rural area because there's not enough population to sustain real infrastructure change, such as a new substation or even the ability to extend existing grid lines that far. But the other part of it is that we're looking at distributed energy generation, especially from solar. In these areas, they're very attractive places for solar development. So you'll have the ability to be able to charge, whether from a large solar farm or residential rooftop solar panels within these rural areas. The challenges of that is obviously reliability. With these renewable generation sources, it is harder to get a 24/7 supply of electricity for either electric vehicles or even your home. That being said, managed charging programs and having a demand response system to manage this kind of reliability challenge is very important. The same applies in dense urban areas as well, where we have the opposite problem, where there's just so many people, no room to upgrade existing infrastructure. In Boston, in Massachusetts, there is no room to site a new substation or a generator to support this kind of demand. So you're also having to look at distributed energy resources. But unlike in a sparsely populated rural area, there's also very few places where you can install solar panels. So having a managed charging program is really key in these areas to shift the load for people's electric vehicles and also for transit, light duty electric vehicles, to shift that load so it's distributed throughout the day instead of at one peak.
Yeah, and Jason, I would just add one thing is the colleagues on the panel talking infrastructure in terms of the EV equipment and technology itself. And then Sophia was just talking about utility infrastructure. And in the previous panel, the speaker from ChargePoint was talking about Starbucks, which is both in densely urban areas as well as rural areas, is almost kind of being a fuel station of the future, right? Where people can go up and get a latte and charge. And so I think the third application of like infrastructure that's kind of near and dear to my heart at GridPoint is, what does that mean for the actual building electrical infrastructure that's supporting the charging, to the extent that that charging equipment is actually, quote unquote, behind the meter. And so there's significant impacts to putting, large loads, such as, level 2 or even, higher, charging equipment at a commercial property. And I think it's really going to be with the kind of a, continued education of the kind of commercial host, as well as working in tight concert with, Eversource and other utility partners nationwide, to make sure that as a narrow slice of the overall grid support for EV charging, that buildings can actually flip and become a reliable resource for the grid as it relates to kind of grid interactive demand response programs, and certainly kind of shifting loads so that kind of supply and demand are where they need to be balanced.
You touched on a really interesting topic that's probably a little bit under discussed right now, is really the difference between the level 2 charging and the DCFC charging. So everyone right now, and I see Srijata shaking her head because it's so true, everyone's talking DC fast. That's right. What the Biden administration is talking about. That's going to electrify the rural corridors and our transit pathways. But it does have very significant implications on the grid. You're pulling a lot of electricity. You're pulling it very, very quickly. It's very, you can't predict when the next car is going to come in and draw from the grid. Level 2 is really the unsung hero of this infrastructure and this network that we need to build out in the United States and of course around the world. But because it's much more reliable, it's smooth and steady. And it's perfect for overnight charging. People want to charge at home so they can plug in and do it during off-peak hours as well.
What is level 2 chargers enough to get more consumers into the market? Thinking about going to a Walgreens or something like that, run in for 12, 15 minutes and really don't get a whole lot of a charge in that time. So what's your take on the DC is obviously the one that everyone's looking at, and but how effective can level 2 be for bringing new consumers into the space?
It's that change of mindset. It's no longer driving to the gas station to get gas. It fits into your life. We're coming out with a new mobile app for consumers, which does that. You can search, I'm going to be at a restaurant, where's the nearest charger? Or I need a charge, where's the nearest restaurant? So it's really thinking through that kind of topping up whenever you're somewhere with a charger. You just plug in a little here, a little there, but not going from 0 to full. It's a very different mindset, and we kind of need to get away from that mindset with traditional gasoline fueling. But also, 80, 85, depending on the statistics you want to read, people want to charge at home. So anyone with a single family home, if we really are serious about reducing range anxiety, the easiest way to do that is every new home comes with an EV charger installed in it already. Then your consumer is very comfortable and ready to make the switch.
Any other thoughts on a DC versus level 2?
Yeah, and I think my thought is that it's not one or the other, right? And I think we forget that a lot. Like your example in Walgreens, the data shows that people run into Walgreens for 15 minutes. Data shows that people do not run into Whole Foods for 15 minutes, right? They run in for 45 minutes, an hour. And so there's a different product that's appropriate for each one of those scenarios, and that's the way that Volta network plans, I mentioned we take our network planning very seriously, and a number of utilities are also using our software for their own planning. Municipalities are using. We just announced a really exciting City of Hoboken collaboration, and I think the good news is that a lot of folks are sort of thinking about the fact that it might not just be a DC story because of the impact to the grid, the cost of putting in these assets, the complication of putting in these assets, right? Like it's a lot harder to do DC behind the meter because you need a lot of upgrades, and it just is a longer process from a utility perspective, to the point Evan was touching on earlier. And so, I think with, the administration, all these funds coming out, it's a really exciting time. And, I've spent time in the renewable space previously, and there has been more coverage federally of the renewables, of solar and wind assets previously, and charging is somewhat new. And it's super exciting, but to Rebecca's point, it is kind of focused on the DC assets, which is not wrong, but it doesn't have to be one or the other. And these are some of the considerations that we have in thinking about, like, how do we actually get infrastructure out there to enable adoption. It doesn't just have to be DC, but it's a shift. It's a shift for everyone.
And I'll agree and add to that. Again, a lot of it in terms of infrastructure placement comes down to dwell time and kind of the considerations on the ground. But don't forget about the vehicle stock.
Mm-hmm.
For now and for a long time, we'll have a mix of fully battery electric vehicles with hundreds of miles of charge, and we'll have plug-in hybrids with shorter electric ranges that can maximize their electric miles with level 2 charging perfectly fine. So recognizing that, especially when utility ratepayer funds, for example, federal taxpayer dollars are being channeled into this segment, we need to serve as many vehicles as possible, and it will continue to be a mix of level 2 DC fast and level 1 in some cases in terms of, private homes in particular, maybe even like a kiss and ride lot, transit, kind of long dwell times. We've seen level 1 be effective as well.
A few minutes ago, Evan mentioned the effects of rising adoption on the commercial space. And I just wanted to give anyone else an opportunity to chime in if they had perspectives on that as well.
I'll just mention that, I think Evan kind of alluded to this. It's, EV charging is seen more and more as an amenity, by those commercial building owners and operators. As many of us are working from home, the workforce is returning to the office. In some cases, employers are seeking ways to lure people in. Giving EV charging, can be on that list. And so, it's not, sometimes the motivation behind installing EV chargers in workplace, retail maybe, again, brand awareness, sustainability, putting, associating the brand with that greener transportation option. Others might be, how can we better serve our employees? So it is, certainly an individual commercial decision, but we're certainly seeing trends and why, workplace and retail and other commercial charging applications are going in.
And Evan, earlier in your,
I'm sorry.
sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
To add a little bit of a global perspective, so we have a subsidiary in Belgium, and there it's all about the workplace charging, because usually as part of the compensation package, you'll get a vehicle as part of your compensation, and then they would pay for the maintenance and they would pay for the fuel and what have you. Well, now they're switching to electric vehicles by and large, so they're providing the charging stations at home and at the workplace as well. And I think a lot can be learned from Europe in that sense. They're a little bit further along on their adoption of electric vehicles. So pretty soon it's not going to be an amenity. It's gonna have to be a must-have to be competitive.
Evan, you alluded to this in your intro about charging EVs is changing how consumers interact with brands. Thought you could expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think, so there's a couple different ways, right? So number one is, as we talked about, the kind of, if people buy EVs to go drive somewhere, and so the brands, right, that they're driving to want to support that type of consumer. And so I think there's from a convenience perspective, actually even increased foot traffic, that's really important. But it's impossible to disentangle that from sustainability, because the brands that are increasingly kind of like the tip of the spear in terms of the EV kind of meeting the consumers where they are probably, in our case, often kind of leaders in sustainability aspects. And so if you're going to be a brand that's leaning in to sustainability, it's vital, we believe, that you're also managing not only the EV assets, but the entire building or your entire kind of carbon footprint appropriately, so you can kind of descale your overall carbon impact. And there's no doubt about it, right? Adding EV charging equipment to a property increases the overall energy consumption and load. And so at a time where we're working with commercial properties that are kind of doing the right thing and leaning into sustainability, they're also really contending with the energy markets, which are complex and vast and changing in a way that they previously hadn't had to do so. And so we're finding, companies are really kind of taking a multiple approach, right? Because on the one hand, there is the support and the infrastructure that's needed for when customers of theirs or consumers of theirs drive their EVs to their locations, to their properties, in order to buy goods or services. But the flip is also true, and it's not, I'd say, not discussed as regularly, is the opposite. What if the product or service that a commercial entity offers is itself electric, like electric vehicle at an auto dealership, or through a delivery service that the fleet itself is being kind of electrified to deliver, food on Grubhub or whatever. And the latter is requiring, commercial customers who are really putting in EV equipment to kind of not only be early adopters, but kind of come up with the strategies that make sure that they are satisfying their customers from both the sustainability perspective, but managing their energy impacts and carbon impacts prudently. It's a big change all at once. And so I think there's probably the rest of my colleagues on this panel can kind of talk about how they're supporting those efforts.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about the charging experience, and how much of a barrier that is. So when I think about, I don't have an EV yet, but I'm an intender, so I hope to very soon. One of the things I think of in my head is payments, billing, right? So ideally, I would just plug in my car, and the platform within whether it's EVgo or whoever it is, regardless of what kind of charger it is going to recognize my car, and then the payment would be made to a system. I wouldn't have to do anything. I wouldn't have to think about how it's going to work, like when I go to the gas station. So just want to get your thoughts on, how we can make the payment of electrical charging, a lower barrier for consumers. And Srijata, why don't we start with you? Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I think that I'm going to answer this in a different way. I think this brings us back to the point of this is still early in the industry. And, I spent a number of years at Tesla. And of course, that was a big part of the closed ecosystem play, that it would be perfectly seamless to provide this experience to drivers. And especially because those were drivers at the very early part of the curve, right, of the adoption curve. I think as we go on, this is where that ecosystem thing really comes in, because it really does depend on the auto OEMs, the charger OEMs, the software language that connects it all. And of course, there's a lot of work being done with various parts of the ecosystem to standardize that software and how we, do this in the future. Volta, of course, is thinking about this and working on this all the time. And there are sort of interim authentication things you can do to sort of mimic plug and charge in the way that Tesla does it, right? But like ultimately, I think this is the really exciting part of the industry where all this work is going on to determine what the standard future will be. But we're really kind of at the beginning of it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because the equipment is there. There's certainly a desire. It's getting the OEMs really on board with their side of the technology as well. Our new products are launching with vehicle to grid, plug and charge, all the latest technology and functionality, but that doesn't necessarily mean the vehicles are ready for it yet. So it's a very exciting development, and one I think you're actually going to see first instances of it fully operational with your fleet vehicles. But that's just my prediction for the future.
Yeah, I mean, quickly taking just a broad view, I commend the charging network providers, the manufacturers, the vehicle manufacturers, for trying to anticipate as many things as possible while standing up an industry. The partnerships that have come together quite rapidly, I think, are impressive and moving the industry along. Trying to accommodate calls for reliability, interoperability, vehicle to grid, future proofing. I mean, these are all these buzzwords that everyone's dealing with on a daily basis. And and supply chain issues. Try to do all this when everyone's backed up with orders and demand. So it is very early days. At the same time, we have to celebrate the incredible progress that the industry has made, and recognizing that it's not going to be perfect. And there's still plenty of work to do. It's job security for all of us in the industry. But the partnerships and progress that's been made, it's really pretty incredible when you think about it.
And while we're talking about money, can you tell the audience, and I'll start with Stacy again, tell the audience what the cost per mile is compared to gasoline?
Yeah, I mean, it varies, but the message is that the average EV driver, whether you're owning the vehicle, leasing the vehicle, or a fleet operator, you're going to see savings over the life of the vehicle, and that comes from even with upfront costs of the vehicle itself being slightly more expensive, as well as if you have to install infrastructure from a fleet perspective. You've got the lower cost of ownership wrapped into electricity savings, especially compared to $5 fuel that we were just seeing. But the maintenance savings really adds up. So not having to get oil changes, fewer moving parts. So you've got, overall a much more economic picture. And, that appeals to early adopters. That's one of the reasons why, EVs have been so popular. But it's also I think one of the reasons why we're going to move beyond early adopters rather quickly, and even into lower income disadvantaged communities that the transportation, component of their spending is significant. Getting hands on a pre-owned electric vehicle, again, you don't have quite as long of a life depending on how old that vehicle is when you purchase it, but those savings still rack up. So it is still an individual calculation depending on vehicle, depending on electricity costs, but I think most of the ways that you slice it, it's savings for the operator.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about home charging. And I'd like to start with Sophia. Working for a market research company, I'm very interested in data. So I'm very curious how you go about determining, what the future demand is going to be in your utility footprint. So any additional insights you could provide on that, I think would be valuable for the audience.
Sure, I can speak to that. So right now, growth in electric vehicles, especially in the residential area, is definitely coming due to consumer demand, but also the state and federal initiatives. So in Massachusetts, we have a 2050 net zero decarbonization initiative, and the state is predicting nearly 100% passenger vehicle EVs and about 50% heavy duty EVs. And that's just at a state level. So for us, we care more about the granularity of it. We want to know how these EVs will be distributed, if there's going to be quantifying the electric demand. Because this technology is fairly new and we are trying to look 20, 30 years into the future, there's a lot of uncertainty around it. For example, for air conditioning, when air conditioning first came onto the market, it wasn't until maybe 20, 30 years later that we saw a predictable trend that we could quantify in our short-term forecasts. So the way that industry is looking at electric vehicle adoption right now, there's two main approaches. One is using a more principle-driven approach that's taking basically the overall stock of vehicles and then applying certain assumptions and calculations to see how many of them convert to EVs. And then the other approach is a data-driven approach, which looks at existing customers for EV and their attributes, compare with people who don't have EVs and trying to predict adoption that way. So that is a more consumer side, consumer characteristic demand assessment, whereas the principles approach commonly used by consultants for utilities is more of a rules approach. So our initiative is trying to make a hybrid of those two to get the best of both worlds and set certain parameters in which we can, one, see if we can achieve the goals that the state has set, that has foreseen, and two, how we would do that through help with managed charging or with incentives. So I think a large part of the uncertainty is due to the utility itself and the suppliers of these infrastructure, how we shape EVs are distributed and charged, rather than we trying to predict organic consumer demand. So there is a push to get more and more data, because right now there's just not enough to accurately predict decades into the future. But the short-term turnovers in terms of 1 to 5 year purchases, there are good models for that in the automobile industry, which we're trying to incorporate.
Do consumer demographics within your footprint play into your model, play into your analysis? Our research shows that the vast majority of EV owners are under 45 years of age. So, when you start looking out over decades, is that part of the analysis?
So short answer, it is part of the analysis, but we have to be very careful because correlation does not mean causation, and also it's a very interesting way to look at it from demographics, because there are certain characteristics that we have seen in certain neighborhoods that are more prone to adopt EVs, but we don't want to perpetuate any bias in those attributes, because if we only use demographics to inform our analysis, that would mean that EV chargers or grid support is only available in certain areas. We fail to allow other areas to have the same kind of equity for this distribution. So it is part of the analysis, but we try not to let it drive the analysis and the results. I think we have to proceed carefully, because this really has a role in how EVs are adopted in the future.
Okay, and speaking of home charging, Rebecca, I think Blink has a home solution as well as a public space solution. Can you tell us what sort of challenges you deal with compared to the public spaces we've been talking about in the home?
Yeah, for sure. So on the home side, we are an equipment provider. So we'll sell the equipment. We actually have a new one coming out at the end of this month. Very excited about that. A smart charging piece of equipment that can be more intelligent in use of your electricity, so you can set different charging times and whatnot to be off peak and what have you. But on the home charging side, we're actually, some of the roadblocks we're running into tend to take us back to the more semi-public sector, and that's a lot of people come to us and they say, I live in a multifamily building and I want to charge my EV. Now what do I do? So we're having those conversations, with condo associations and developers who, develop apartments and multifamily complexes, because it's a single family home, but it's in a larger entity, and that's really where people want to do it. Single family home's pretty easy. It's just, it's a piece of equipment you can buy, have it installed. I had one installed in my house for a couple $100, $600, I think it was. And they're pretty much all the same with, either smart or not. And then you pair it with software and they get more intelligent. But it's really trying to get them in advance of, like I said, new home, new construction. That would be a pivotal moment. But there is resistance. There are, the home builders aren't wanting to. There's lobbying groups who are actually actively working against that because they don't want to go that route. But it always ends up taking us back to that public charging conversation for all the people who live in condos and multifamily apartments that want to charge at home overnight as well.
Yeah, I want to pick up the EV Ready Building Codes thread that Rebecca just planted, because she's absolutely right. It's much less expensive to install the infrastructure. It doesn't have to be the charger, just everything needed to enable an EV charging station down the road, whether you're talking about a new home or commercial. To do that during construction is the way to go. And so we're seeing many jurisdictions across the country require some sort of infrastructure be built in for a certain percentage of parking spots or residents or whatever that metric might be. So there's a lot of work going on to move the ball for any major renovation or, again, new building, to have that built in so that it's less cost when the resident or retailer wants to install their choice of charger down the road. So another kind of key policy lever that needs to stay in play.
And really, we can look to California. So many times California is leading the way, and certainly in that conversation, they've been the most aggressive and successful.
Okay, we have a few minutes left, so I want to get to a couple questions that have come in from the audience during the discussion before we get to a final question. The first one, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, like, urban, suburban, rural. The question is, who's going to end up paying for the rural build out? That might be Sujata. You want to take a stab?
It's a great question. You know, it's a great question. I mean, obviously the infrastructure bill tries to address a lot of that pain point, although, you know, not in a more peanut butter spread way. I don't know. We think about that a lot. I think, you know, what I will say is from Volta's perspective, again, our model really does rely on highly trafficked areas. And so that even counts out a lot of highway corridors, right? It does count out a lot of places of interest. And we're okay with that because, you know, I think we're all building out assets and they're all needed. And, you know, it's that same rising tides situation. But we shall see. You know, I think local governments and utilities will start to play more of a role too, is my guess.
And certainly to go from there, you know, Blink is an owner operator. We frequently pick up the tab for those. Obviously, we want to be where there's high traffic as well, where we know there's going to be high utilization. But that could mean a location off highway or something. The infrastructure bill, the NEVI funding is for off highway, so that will serve a piece of it. But the states also, they recognize it. We won a very significant award with the state of Vermont to electrify all the corridors in Vermont. They now have their L2, and you know, not a very populous state by any means. But now they have their L2 applications being rolled out as well. And they're looking at multifamily housing units specifically for that, to build that kind of need. So I think it's really going to be a part of the federal funding. It's going to be the states looking at some funding. And then there will be players like Blink or private business entities that see an opportunity there and will go for it. So I think it's going to be a combination.
One more question that came in. So we're talking about different charging locations like MDU properties versus stores versus restaurants. Who sets the pricing for these different locations? Sophia, is it the utility?
We have programs to basically look at how the end use is for the charging. But as far as the distinctions between the commercial properties, I don't think we have an actual set pricing model for that. It mainly depends on how much they use right now.
I think in general, it's usually the site host, depending on the business model. As Sujata can talk about, you know, Volta's in a unique situation, for example, but generally the site host, you know, and how they structure that pricing might be a calculation of just simply covering their costs. They might offer it as a free amenity. They might look at it as a revenue stream down the road. So, you know, there's different considerations that go into that. You also have networks, you know, like Electrify America and others that have a, you know, a different approach to pricing as well. So I think it varies. Certainly don't have consistent pricing across the board, but, you know, EV drivers are very savvy at understanding the pricing structures, looking at those ahead of time.
It's actually a very frustrating question for new EV drivers because there is no consistency or standards, but it's very much like going to a gas station. The costs may change from one station to another station.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, but I would like everyone to chime in on one last question, which is looking forward. So the latest funding is supposed to get 500,000 chargers in place, I believe, by the end of the decade, so 2030. I think that, well, you tell me, we'll say 2030, you know, what's the ecosystem going to look like then? Are we going to get there? What's the adoption of EVs going to look like? Evan, you want to start with this one?
Sure. I think, you know, look, the cat is out of the bag at this point, right? The boulder's rolling downhill, to use another phrase. And I think what we're going to see now is increased adoption, right? Not only of EV charging wherever you are, at home, at work, or on the go, but we're going to see a kind of, I think, a reshaping of driver and consumer habits. In terms of, I think Rebecca was talking about their expectation shift around, where they fuel up versus where they charge up. And I think it's going to create a tremendous amount of maybe some headaches at the beginning in terms of sorting through these challenges, but ultimately a lot of opportunity, and ultimately a far more decarbonized mobility sector than we have today. And it's a very, very, very exciting time to be in the EV industry.
Stacy?
I will point to just the partnerships again. ICF was involved in the early days of EV Readiness Planning Recovery Act, so 2010, era, and that was the first time that some of these players who are now closely coordinating had even talked to each other. So electric vehicles and transportation electrification have brought together this completely new group of stakeholders that continue to do amazing things. And so making sure those partnerships are core to any project, planning ahead, forging those relationships will be increasingly important. I don't think anyone, would say that they could go it alone at this point. So that's, I think, what excites me the most, is just kind of seeing those innovations come through.
Rebecca?
Yeah, to follow on exactly what Stacy was saying, it's not going to take Blink, it's not going to take Volta, it's not going to take ChargePoint and EVgo, it's going to take all of us. We all are going to be extremely busy for a long time to come to meet the demand that's out there. Right now there's a lot of pent up demand for vehicles. When the vehicles start coming, we better have the infrastructure ready for them. So I really think it is a collaborative approach. You're going to see a lot improved consumer experience through interoperability. I think you're going to see more industry consolidation as well. And all of those things will result in a much more reliable, stronger, and robust EV network for everyone.
Yeah, and I think what I'd add is, what we know is that the cars are coming, and we know that they're coming faster than we expected, right? For those of us who have been around for a little bit. What we don't necessarily know is what those cars are going to be, where they're going to be, and we can make guesses. We have ideas, and we know that eventually they'll be in rural Vermont, but maybe not if it's going to be next year or 5 years from now. But, I think what's exciting is that we do know by 2030, they will be here, right? And they will be everywhere. And maybe they'll be the cars that are on the road today, which tend to have bigger batteries or more premium vehicles. They're more likely, of course, to go into, vehicles that get you to and from work and get your kids to soccer practice every day, and do the job, right? At a price tag that's affordable for most Americans. And, I think there's so much left to be learned, but what's exciting is now we kind of have this date by which, all of us can be working together with the backing of the federal government and local entities to kind of achieve an ambitious but maybe doable goal.
So Sophia, since we'll give you the last word, since part of your job is looking into the future. So 2030, what do you anticipate the EV market looking like?
Yeah, so I wanted to build off what Sujata was saying. There's a lot of ambitious goals. And in Massachusetts itself, we have a very, very aggressive goal to reach. If we want to reach 100% passenger EVs by 2050, by 2030, we need 60% of vehicles to be electrified, which is very, very aggressive. And part of our analysis is looking to see if organically that can happen or not, or is there going to need extreme measures of either incentives or punishment or outright bans of gasoline-fueled vehicles to achieve that goal. So I think it is definitely coming very, very fast. We have to prepare, but at the same time, it is very scary how much is needed to achieve the ultimate goal of decarbonization. So, this is a huge undertaking from all parties, utilities, charging companies, the auto industry, the government. We have to be able to have an open platform like we're talking right now to make sure that one side's expectation does not exert or overstrain another parties, and how can we achieve that as painlessly as possible. So I'm excited for that. I think 2030 is coming very quickly. 2050 is also coming very quickly, but we have a bit of room to adjust, and maybe people will change overnight and everybody will take the train instead of driving an EV. Who knows? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but with that comes excitement for the industry.
Well, it's coming, and we thank you for all your contributions to getting us there and your contributions to the panel. Thanks so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful day. This is the last session of the day for the Smart Energy Summit. I wanted to remind you of some market research that is recently published that you might have interest in. If you're interested in the EV topic, you might also be interested in the Smart Energy at Home topic. This is our annual study that we do that looks at consumers' behaviors around energy and energy management, adoption of certain technology products, enrollment in certain utility programs, and preferences along those lines. That is a study that published this year. Upcoming research, now we don't even have to say upcoming anymore, because the electric vehicle and smart home study, another consumer study, has published. You've seen a few kind of teaser slides from that study. If you're interested in that, let us know. And as Chris mentioned earlier in the day, we're going to be publishing some industry analysis in the next month or two related to solar and storage. So the next time we'll get together for the Smart Energy Summit will be just before Thanksgiving, November 17th. We'll be feasting on the topic of distributed energy and new values, shifting from a centralized grid. Again, that is November 17th, and that's virtual. We'll be back in person in Austin, Texas in 2023. More details to come on that. And just a reminder that this is one of several events that Parks Associates hosts. In addition to the Smart Energy Summit, our flagship Connections event, which looks at all things connected home, is well over 25 years that we've been doing that. Connections Summit at CES, our Connected Health Summit, Future of Video event, and a new one that we're launching that's we're talking about MDUs a little bit, it's called Smart Spaces. This is a new Parks Associates hosted event. It's going to look at technology adoption and opportunities in MDUs, senior living facilities, college dorms, and the like. A reminder that we also do custom marketing services. So you can contact my colleague Ashton if you're interested in talking about doing a white paper, webinar, or even a podcast with Parks Associates. And there is her contact information. If you have any questions on the research that we've discussed today, then you can reach out to me. My colleague, Mindy Sues, Vice President of Marketing, she's the person you want to talk to if you're interested in speaking at one of our events, and she'll be happy to set you up with a link to our Call for Papers site. So on behalf of the Parks Associates team, thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
On average, US broadband households with smart home devices own more than 7 devices and spend thousands of dollars a year on home services. Parks Associates Consumer Insights dashboards share adoption, consumer demand, and market changes across the year for 5 leading markets serving the connected home to identify critical shifts in these markets and in consumer sentiment by tracking the core metrics that matter. This consumer research draws from surveys of more than 10,000 US households, including trending data, sometimes reaching back more than a decade. Parks Associates offers consumer insights dashboards for 5 markets: home services, consumer electronics, video services, residential security, and smart home. To share a little more, we recently released the Smart Home Dashboard, revealing that 1/4 of US broadband households bought at least one smart home device in the past 12 months. And households with at least one smart home device now own, on average, more than 7 devices. This dashboard covers the extensive product categories active in the smart home, including smart thermostats, smart appliances, network cameras, video doorbells, smart smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, smart door locks, smart garage door openers, and smart lighting products, among others. We also recently announced the release of the Home Services Dashboard, tracking broadband, mobile, and other consumer services. This dashboard shows that as of Q1 2021, the percentage of US broadband households with standalone broadband service increased from 33% in Q1 2018 to 41% in Q1 2021, following the declining popularity of pay TV bundles. These consumers pay $64 per month on average for standalone broadband service, up from just $39 per broadband household in 2011, a 64% growth rate. The fastest growing segment of home service bundles is a double play combining home internet and mobile service. Consumers are placing a greater emphasis on high quality broadband and mobile services, which is building value in bundling these services. Both the residential broadband and mobile industries experienced substantial growth during 2020 and into the first half of 2021, with demand particularly strong for high-speed internet and fiber connections. And 19% of US broadband households currently bundle mobile and home internet services, paying an average of $128 per month. Going forward, 24% of US broadband households reported plans to upgrade their home broadband, which would drive broadband service ARPU upwards 5% year over year. Adoption of residential security services has also continued to increase following the COVID-19 pandemic, creating additional bundling opportunities among connectivity and peace of mind services heading into the second half of 2021. Our dashboards provide companies with ongoing and actionable data on the adoption, purchase intentions, and trends for key markets serving the connected consumer at home. We are excited to bring this valuable trending data and insights to the market. To subscribe or request more information, please contact our sales team at sales@parksassociates.com.